Every fire in this campaign starts with the same machine, a Ukrainian long-range attack drone, flying low on a route no pilot corrects in real time. On the 18th of August 2024, one of them reached the Kavkaz oil depot outside Proletarsk, in Russia's Rostov region, and lit a fire crews could not put out for 2 weeks. The depot held 74 fuel tanks. Multiple outlets reported dozens of them destroyed. The blaze covered roughly 10,000 square meters, about 2.5 American football fields, and dozens of firefighters were hurt containing it. The fire was still burning 10 days later, nearly 600 miles, almost 1,000 kilometers, from the nearest Ukrainian-held ground. So how does a country with a full layered air defense network keep missing the same kind of aircraft again and again? Start with why a fuel depot is worth a drone in the first place. A tank of diesel does not fight, but nothing else does either without it. Every truck resupplying the front draws from the same national fuel system, and that system is not endless. Before the full-scale invasion, Russia was among the world's largest crude producers and exported significant volumes of diesel and other refined products alongside its own domestic supply. Reuters' analysis in the second half of 2025 found that strikes on 10 refineries had knocked out at least 17% of Russian refining capacity, on the order of 1.1 million barrels a day. Bloomberg reported that Russian refining output had fallen to a 24-year low by August of 2026. Neither figure comes from a body like the Institute for the Study of War or the Oryx Loss Database, which track individual strikes and equipment losses, but do not publish an aggregate refining capacity percentage. Both numbers trace to wire service analysis rather than an institutional tally, and they carry that caveat here. Militaries have targeted enemy fuel before. Allied bombers spent much of 1944 trying to cripple German synthetic fuel plants for the same underlying reason. An army with empty tanks cannot maneuver, no matter how many tanks or planes it still has on paper. What is different this time is the tool. A campaign that once needed 1,000 bomber raids and years of losses now runs on drones that cost a rounding error of what a single heavy bomber sortie once cost in aircraft and crews. 10 days after Proletarsk, on the 28th of August 2024, Ukraine's Military Intelligence Service, the GUR, and its Special Operations Forces struck the Atlas oil facility near Kamensk-Shakhtinsky, also in Rostov region. The site sat roughly 15 kilometers, 9 miles, from the border of Russian-occupied Luhansk and, by contemporary reporting, around 170 kilometers, over 100 miles, from the front line itself. That distance mattered. At the time, Russian planners could reasonably treat it as rear area territory, safely behind the belt of air defense, concentrated closer to the fighting. Some of the facilities in this campaign sit inside the Caspian Pipeline Consortium system, which moves several tens of millions of tons of oil a year from Kazakhstan through Russian territory to export terminals on the Black Sea. A strike on one of those nodes can disrupt exports that have nothing to do with Russia's own war supply, adding a diplomatic complication on top of the military one. Quick pause here. If you want the mechanism behind the next weapon in this war explained the same way, subscribe now, because the next breakdown in this series is already in production. Back to the depots. Ukrainian officials separately put the value of fuel destroyed at Proletarsk at roughly $200 million. A figure that has not been independently audited, but gives a sense of the scale even one strike can reach against a target that, on paper, sat inside a defended rear area. Ukraine folded its long-range drone units into a dedicated unmanned systems forces command, built specifically to run campaigns like this one, alongside the GUR and the SBU Security Service, both of which have claimed individual strikes without publishing operational details. What makes this campaign different from a single spectacular strike is repetition against the same targets. Some refineries have been hit once, others have been hit 6, 7, 8 times over more than a year, patched and restarted after each one, then hit again. The real story is not that Ukraine can reach a depot once, but that Russia cannot reliably stop it from reaching the same depot twice. The workhorses of this campaign are Ukrainian-built long-range strike drones, distinct from the small first-person view drones that hunt tanks at the front. The AN-196 Liutyi, built by the state aerospace firm Ukroboronprom and first shown publicly in October of 2022, is the largest of the family. Its manufacturer has declared a range up to 2,000 kilometers, over 1,200 miles, on some batches, and a warhead upgraded from 50 kilograms to 75, an unaudited claim but a directionally credible one, given the airframe's size. The UJ-26 Bober from the private firm Ukrjet carries a smaller 20-kilogram shaped charge to a manufacturer-declared range of roughly 1,000 kilometers. The UJ-22 Airborne, also from Ukrjet, can reportedly fly autonomously to about 800 kilometers and has been fitted to carry improvised loads, including RPG warheads packed internally. None of these figures carry independent verification, so treat range and warhead weight as the builder's own claim rather than an audited spec. These drones typically launch from mobile ground platforms or improvised strips well inside Ukrainian-controlled territory, close enough to the border that flight time to a Rostov region target can run under an hour, but far enough back to survive Russian counter-battery fire aimed at the launch site itself. Cost deserves a caveat here, because the cheap drone narrative does not fully hold. A Bober has been reported at over $100,000 a unit, which is not pocket change, and even the Liutyi's declared bill of materials runs into the tens of thousands. The unit price is not where the trade tilts. A single successful strike can put tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of fuel and infrastructure out of action for weeks, a ratio no interceptor missile can compete with. The harder engineering problem is the flight itself, 800 to 2,000 kilometers into Russian airspace, with no human operator correcting the drone the whole way. GPS signal over Russian territory is treated as unreliable at best and jammed at worst, so these systems lean on inertial navigation, dead reckoning from a known starting point, corrected where possible against preloaded terrain and landmark data, rather than a live satellite fix. Arriving in the right area is one thing. Hitting the exact tank a planner meant to hit is another. Some systems reportedly cross-check position against preloaded imagery during the final approach, comparing what an onboard sensor sees against a stored picture of the target. That terminal step is the hardest part to verify from outside, since neither side publishes hit versus miss data, and geolocated post-strike video is the only real evidence of what connected. Nothing about that low, slow flight looks like a fast, high-flying missile, and that mismatch is what makes it hard to intercept. Layered air defense, the Pantsir S-1 short-range system, and the Buk and Tor M2 batteries is built around exactly the opposite threat profile, something with a large, unmistakable radar signature. A drone with a wooden or composite airframe returns a much weaker echo, and it can sit below the radar horizon, the curve of the Earth and local terrain that hides low-altitude targets until they are already close. Think of the radar horizon the way a ship vanishes hull first over open water. A ground radar can only see as far as the curve of the Earth allows at a given altitude, and a drone flying at treetop height stays under that curve until it is already close. That compresses what should be a multi-stage intercept, detect, identify, engage, into one rush decision with seconds instead of minutes on the clock. A single S-400 or Pantsir interceptor is commonly estimated in Western defense press at several $100,000 to over $1 million depending on type, several times the price of even the more expensive Ukrainian strike drones. That gap is part of why defenders are reportedly reluctant to expend interceptors freely against a mixed wave that may include cheap decoys alongside the real threat. Multiple defense press outlets covering the campaign describe Russian short-range systems underperforming against exactly this profile in practice, despite being nominally suited to stop it on paper. Part of that is arithmetic. Each battery takes specialized production and trained crews, plus time to field, and a finite number of them cannot cover a refinery near the front at the same time as one a few hundred kilometers back and another over 1,000 kilometers deep in the interior. The Afipsky refinery in Krasnodar region reported anywhere from roughly 200 to 400 kilometers, about 125 to 250 miles, from the front depending on the source, shows what that arithmetic looks like over time. It was struck in early August of 2025, again later that month, again in late September, again in late October, and again into 2026. The late October strike was reportedly organized by Ukraine's Domestic Security Service, the SBU, rather than the GUR, evidence that more than one Ukrainian agency runs strikes into this same target set independently. Each strike triggered fires and forced repairs, and each time production resumed, the site went back on the target list rather than off it. Range and stealth explain how one drone gets through. The campaign rarely sends just one. Multiple strikes have hit widely separated targets on the same night, forcing Russian air defense to cover the country's full width rather than mass around a single likely axis. Russian state media has at times reported several hundred drones intercepted in a single barrage, a figure that reflects Moscow's own claimed intercept count and should be read as an account of scale rather than an independently confirmed tally. That tempo only holds across more than a year if production keeps pace with losses. Ukraine's long-range drone industry has scaled from small workshop runs toward what officials and industry figures describe as ongoing serial production across several families at once, though exact output numbers are not independently verified and vary by source. Once a drone gets through, the target does the rest of the damage. None of these warheads need to punch through armor plate. A fuel tank's shell is built to hold still liquid under normal pressure, rather than resist a blast, so penetration is almost incidental. The warhead only has to open it. Floating roof tanks, the common design at Russian depots, let escaping vapor pool once breached, and vapor ignites far more violently than liquid fuel because it mixes readily with air. Fire engineers have names for what happens next, depending on which part of the tank fails first. A rim seal fire if the floating roof's edge gasket burns, a boil-over if trapped water beneath the fuel flashes to steam and throws burning oil into the air. A burning tank radiates enough heat to threaten the tank beside it, which is the mechanical reason one strike at Proletarsk grew into a fire that consumed dozens of tanks and took 2 weeks to control. Restarting a refinery unit after a fire is not a light switch operation. Damaged distillation columns, pumps, and control systems often have to be shipped in or fabricated under sanctions that restrict access to Western refining equipment, part of why some facilities take months rather than weeks to return to full output, and why a second strike on a facility still mid-repair does disproportionate damage compared to hitting it once at full capacity. Novokuybyshevsk, a Rosneft-owned refinery in Samara region, on the middle Volga, processing close to 9 million tons of crude a year by the company's own figures, shows the deeper-range version of the same pattern. Reporting counts at least 7 strikes across 2025 and into 2026, in August, once in October, twice in November, and again in January and April of the following year, with operations suspended entirely after the October strike. Samara sits well beyond the range most planners would assume Ukrainian drones could reliably reach, which is exactly why the site kept getting hit rather than reinforced fast enough to matter. Western defense analysts, writing for institutes such as RUSI and CSIS, have generally assessed the wider campaign as a genuine complication for Russian logistics rather than a war-winning blow on its own, a middle assessment that avoids both the most optimistic Ukrainian framing and the Kremlin's public dismissal of the strikes as insignificant. The furthest documented case pushes the range question past assumption entirely. In August of 2026, a strike reached the TANECO refinery in Nizhnekamsk, Tatarstan, one of Russia's largest at over 16 million tons of declared annual capacity, widely reported at roughly 1,200 kilometers, about 750 miles, from the front. That same strike also killed a number of civilians. A facility built to refine fuel still employs people and sits near a town, whatever its military value. Tatarstan is also home to much of Russia's own drone manufacturing, including facilities that build Shahed-style strike drones under license. So a refinery strike reaching that deep matters for more than the barrels it took offline. Reporting around the same period describes a single night in which Ukraine struck oil sites roughly 1,300 kilometers apart, along with a port terminal much closer to the front. That forced Russian air defense to cover the entire width of the country at once rather than concentrate on one likely axis. Russian state media reported large numbers of drones intercepted that night. Again, Moscow's own account of scale, not a neutral count of what got through. Russia has not sat still through any of this. It has reinforced air defense around Moscow and other high-value sites, and adjusted patrol patterns after major strikes elsewhere, though no reporting ties a specific redeployment to a specific refinery strike closely enough to state as fact here. What the strike record does show, independent of any single countermeasure, is that reinforcing one place has not closed the gap somewhere else. For the officers responsible for this infrastructure, that is a standing dilemma rather than a single crisis to solve. Doctrine for defending rear area sites typically prioritizes by proximity to the front and strategic value, a reasonable framework, right up until an adversary reaches facilities ranked low on that list, as easily as the ones ranked high. Each strike outside the previously assumed safe radius forces a reassessment of the whole priority list, and reassessing a national air defense posture takes far longer than launching a drone. Put the geography of these 5 strikes side by side, 15 kilometers from occupied territory at Kamensk-Shakhtinsky, a few hundred kilometers back on a repeating schedule at Afipsky, and roughly 1,200 kilometers deep at TANECO, all defended by the same finite stock of batteries and radar coverage. Predicting where the next strike lands means predicting which of those distances Ukraine chooses to demonstrate next, and the campaign's pattern so far is that it keeps choosing all of them. This is not one dramatic weapon making Russian air defense obsolete overnight. It is closer to what Reuters and Bloomberg's numbers describe, a slow bleed, spread across dozens of individual strikes, most of which barely made international headlines on their own. The Proletarsk fire got attention because it burned for 2 weeks in plain sight. Most of the Novokuybyshevsk and Afipsky strikes did not, so the campaign's actual weight sits in that repetition rather than in any single night. What is not yet proven deserves equal weight. Ukraine has not disabled Russia's fuel supply to its own military. The General Staff's stated goal of complicating logistics to the front is a target still being pursued rather than achieved, and Russia has kept most of these refineries running in some capacity after every hit, so treat every damage figure here as evidence of disruption rather than confirmation of collapse. There have also been scattered reports of local fuel shortages and price spikes inside Russia during this period, though no outlet has published a direct chain connecting any single depot fire to a specific shortage. The two trends are consistent with each other, but no reporting proves one caused the other. Analysts watching the campaign point to the approach of winter as the next real test, since domestic heating and military fuel demand both rise at the same time. Refining capacity is already reduced, a seasonal pressure point that existed before the strikes began and that the campaign now compounds rather than creates. Whether the campaign eventually forces a real nationwide air defense build-out or a slower acceptance of a permanently lower refining ceiling is not something the available reporting can answer yet. What the record so far supports is narrower and still significant. Well over a year of strikes across 3 very different distances from the front, against a widening set of targets, with no documented case yet of Russia closing the gap for good at any one of them. Not because Russia cannot stop a drone, it has stopped plenty. It is that it cannot yet predict where the next one gets through, and until that changes, every depot on the map is a target it has to defend all at once. The next breakdown in this series follows the missile that Ukraine built to solve the opposite problem, not sneaking a small drone past the defenses, but outrunning them entirely.